Great. So first of all, we would like to welcome you to our webinar. We're really excited to host the session. For those of you who have joined us before, thank you very much for coming back. For those of you that are coming for the first time, we're very excited to have you. The purpose of these sessions is to keep all of our clients up to date with what is happening in the market today. So before we get going, please allow me to introduce Amr, who's going to be our guest speaker. We are very excited to have him here today to discuss the topics of the DIFC Directive. So he is the co-founder and CEO of Finflex. He's got over 15 years worth of experience in different industries, such as pharmaceuticals. He's also graduated his MBA from Northampton University. So a lot of changes have happened over the last few weeks, and he's going to be talking about that in detail. Please do ask as many questions as you want, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. My name is Milena, and I will be your host for today. So I will allow the expert to kind of give all the talking points on the subject, and I will ask the questions on your behalf at the end. Before we get started, I just kind of want to tell you a little bit more about who we are, for those of you that are not aware. We are the work-life platform that benefits everybody. We're essentially redefining the way work works for you. We're automating payroll, HR solutions, as well as employee benefits and your insurance. So our aim is to basically create unique solutions for clients like you to enable you to do your jobs better for your members. There's a couple of chats. Okay. So the agenda for today, we're going to be looking at 5 different things. So number 1, what is the COVID-19 directive and the kind of changes that happened last week, the impact that this has on sick leaves, as well as pay cuts, vacation and unpaid leaves, remote working and access to workplace facilities, and then the impact of end of service gratuity and visa termination of employees. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow Amr to share his. Let me just, Amr, are you able to share your screen with us? Cool. And are you able to share your video with us, or is it still disabled?
I think, Milena, my video is kind of disabled.
That's fine. You can go through the presentation, and then,
yeah.
Like I said, if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A section or in the chat, and then we will answer it at the end.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Milena introduced me, my name is Amr, and I'm the CEO and co-founder in Finflex. Finflex specializes in handling employees' end of service gratuity on behalf of their employers. And the topic we are talking about today is something that is very unique to the situation, and it's just fresh out of the press, as they say. So without further ado, what we're talking about today is the COVID-19 directive, as they call it. It's a presidential directive issued by the DIFC president, and it's just issued on 22nd of April. And there are 3 unique characteristics about this directive. Number 1, that it's one of the very few directives issued by DIFC that is effective immediately. For those of you who are familiar with the DIFC, they usually take their time to discuss and give community debates about any laws or regulations they issue, this time with effective immediately to complement the emergency of the situation. Number 2, this directive has a certain validity, which is until 31st of July, and it could be further extended by another directive. So it can be extended mutually. It has to be extended by another directive by DIFC. And the other most unique thing about it, it supersedes the DIFC employment law, which in terms means the emergency measures that are taken within this directive period wouldn't put companies under any legal obligations in terms of employment law. So what measures are taken in this directive? What's unique about this directive, it allows the employers to take certain emergency measures without prior consent from their employees. And these measures are very specific, which is inducing certain working hours with reduction or increase, imposing vacation leaves, unpaid leaves, reducing the salary or remuneration on temporary basis, so within the validity period of the directive itself, restrict access to the workplace, and impose certain remote working conditions and requirements. And we will go into details, as Melin highlighted, within each one of these areas. So starting with the most important one that was very pressing issue, sick leaves. Any employee that is affected or quarantined due to COVID-19 is entitled to a full pay by the employer during the treatment or quarantine period. So, because obviously there was a lot of debate going on about if someone is affected, what is the sick leave, what is counted as a sick leave or not. So now the directive makes it very clear that the employees that are affected or have been submitted into quarantine due to the COVID-19 are entitled to their full pay during the treatment and quarantine period. Number two is that sick leave that the employee has taken during the affection or the quarantine will not count towards the annual sick leave quota, which is the normal 60 days sick leave, paid sick leave as per the DIFC employment law. So the period in this quarantine or in this treatment, it will not be included in the 60 days period. The most important thing that you need to know is, as it comes with some restrictions on the employers and employees, it has to be very clear. The employee cannot be terminated because of or during the period of that sick leave. So if an employee is in quarantine at the moment or is subject to treatment, the employer cannot terminate that employee. However, all of these conditions come with certain limitations that the employee must provide a leave certificate from a competent authority, and what DIFC qualified as a competent authority is the Dubai Healthcare Authority or the Ministry of Health and Prevention. Can everybody see the screens correctly? Okay. Number two, the pay cuts and unpaid leaves. And that's one of the topics also that came in a lot of debates and discussions. So DIFC set very clear rules on this, some restrictions on the employers and some restrictions on the employees themselves as well. So as an employer, you can impose pay cuts, paid and unpaid leaves. So you can reduce employees' salary, you can ask them to take part of their annual vacations, or you can ask them to take a complete unpaid leave. And again, let me emphasize, this is within the period of the directive itself until 31st of July. So DIFC has put some conditions on that. The employer has to notify their employees at least 5 days in advance before taking effect of this decision. So you cannot do that backdated. You can't say you started your cut effective on 1st of March or 1st of April. It has to be 5 days after the notification to the employee. And the cuts and that happened during the emergency period, it cannot be extended further until another decree is issued or to limit that regulation. Remote working conditions and access to workplace facilities. This is also one of the areas that a lot of people had debates and discussions about it. So clearly, the employer can impose certain conditions for remote working. By that, the DIFC was very specific in the decree itself that as an employer, you can limit the access to the workplace facility, to the office, or if you have office facilities, you can limit this access immediately. You can impose remote working conditions such as putting activity tracking tools on company devices, on laptops, or on mobile phones to track the activity of your employees. However, this comes with a very specific condition, which is employees have to be aware of these tracking tools. They have to know what software is installed on their devices and what information and data does it collect and for what purpose. And DIFC is very strict when it comes to the data privacy and what kind of information is shared with third parties. Also, the employer is responsible for complying with the DHA rules when it comes to the social distancing, the spacing, the capacity of workplaces in the office, as we speak, it's 30% capacity. So you can't actually put any more employees in there. And if you're running a retail or an F&B space, you have to stick to these rules. And these have to be communicated clearly with both the clients and both the employees as well. So you're responsible for their safety while they are in the workplace. However, also highlighted in the decree that the DIFC eliminates that responsibility for the remote working. So in short, as an employer, you're only responsible for your employees in your workplace or in the office. You're not responsible for their safety when they are working remotely from their homes. And this was also something very specific. Now, one of the things that employees in DIFC should be aware of, that you have to comply with these rules set by your employers, or you risk yourself of being terminated immediately for a cause. And termination for a cause means that you're not entitled to any gratuity or any other benefits that attach to your employment law. So you have to be very careful if the employer is asking for certain working hours or certain places that could be accessed or not accessed, limitation on inviting clients or running meetings within the work facilities. These are things that you need to consider very carefully. Visas of terminated employees, and this is also something that DIFC has issued a lot of leniency when it comes to the visas of terminated employees, considering the limitations on flying and grounding of the flights, and a lot of people have their families, schools are still running, so they've run a lot of leniency when it comes to this issue. So as an employer, you can cancel the delay of, you can delay the cancellation of the visa process of your terminated employees beyond the normal grace period that we're all aware of, the 30 days after the termination. So you can actually extend that until further notice. And in some cases, it can extend until maybe the end of the year. And as an employer, if you choose to not cancel your employee visa to do that extension period, you must continue to provide the basic medical insurance. And if applicable, if part of the employment record was to provide accommodation, especially for retail and food and beverage areas, you still have to provide that employee with that accommodation. So basically, if you keep them on your visa during the extension period, you need to continue to provide the medical insurance and the accommodation if it's applicable. But as an employee, you need to be aware that during the extension period, you don't accrue any benefits. So it doesn't count in your gratuity, or you don't get any housing allowance or any transportation or any other allowances that were attached to your salary or employment contract. The only thing you get is the extension of your medical insurance and the extension of your access to the accommodation if it was offered to you. Now, the most common subject, and this was one of the main pillars that DIFC issued that decree, obviously under these circumstances, a lot of companies are letting go of some of their employees, or they're reducing their salaries. So employees need to be aware of what's going on with their end of service gratuity. So the rule here is very clear. We have two main dates as benchmarks, 1st of March and 22nd of April. 1st of March is when DIFC started the dues scheme, which for those of you who are not aware, it's the monthly contribution where the companies have to pay the end of service gratuity on monthly basis, not accrue it annually. And 22nd of April, which is the date of the decree itself. So the rule is very simple. Any gratuity that are accrued to the employee before 1st of March 2020 will be calculated based on February basic salary. And in short, this is before the company reduced their salaries due to the emergency COVID-19 measures. And then if that employer wishes to pay all this amount that are accrued in advance, as soon as they join the dues scheme, again, the calculation will be based on the February salary, which means the original basic salary, not the reduced basic salary. The third point, which is during the emergency period, obviously some companies either reduced their salaries or completely had salary cuts. The calculation of the dues contribution will be based on the new reduced salary, or if it's a complete salary cut, this means that the employee will not receive any dues monthly contribution. To make it simple, we put an example here. So for any employee at any given point during this period, Starting from wherever they started the end of service until 1st of March, the calculation will be the old standard, 21 days per service year, based on the old basic salary for the one served under 5 years, or 30 days per service year for the ones above 5 years of service. For the time between 1st of March to 1st of May, which is technically April's salary, that will be calculated as per the percentage, the monthly contribution for the dues, which is as set by the DIFC, 5.38% of the basic salary for under 5 years. And to highlight again, that is for the period of February, that is calculated on February or the original unreduced salary. The same applies for above 5 years. That will be 8.33% for the February salary for above 5 years. For the period of 1st of May, the month that we're going through, all the way until the end of emergency measure, as it stands now, 31st of July or further extension, that will be calculated with the same percentage, but on the new modified emergency basic salary, whether it's reduced or whether it's completely cut, which means the employee will not receive any of the gratuity service. So these are the main areas that were covered. There are one more subject that the DIFC touched on clearly, and he said we will discuss that based on case-by-case basis, which is good faith act. As a director or as a manager in a DIFC company, usually you take certain business actions based on an agreement or a complete consensus from your board of directors. In these emergency times, some companies or some managers have to take some emergency measures like applying for loans or delaying certain payments or renegotiating certain contracts. And obviously under the normal circumstances, you have to get the full board consent on these kind of activities. DIFC levied that regulation a little bit, and they said based on case-by-case basis, a manager or a director of the company can take certain measures to sustain the business without reverting back or without having to have a full board meeting, and that would not have any personal liability implications on that director. So I needed to highlight that point as well. This was one of the things that DIFC highlighted in that directive. So these were the main points, and up to you, Milena, now for any questions. Happy to answer.
Great, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. So there's a question here. What are the main DHA rules we have now in regards to working?
So as we speak, the regulations are for those who have access to the work facilities. It has to be limited to a capacity of 30%, and with respect to the social distancing as well. So there will be a reallocation of desks or letting some empty spaces between seating places. Obviously, the standard procedure of providing all the disinfectant materials, making sure that the employees always have access to these disinfectant materials, having certain protocols as in reporting of if an employee or a client or has been any exposure to the COVID in the office, the authorities have to be notified immediately, and there has to be quarantines and measures as well. It's also advisable that you have to communicate that with your employer. One of the things that need to be in place is open communication. Most of employers, as we speak, they put their own channels. So if you have one of your family members, God forbid, is affected or is in quarantine, there are certain measures that you have to take. If you have a family member and you're in touch with certain family members that are elderly, or you have children or pregnant lady in the house, you have to also notify your employer so they limit your exposure to the office if possible. So again, there are certain restrictions by the Ministry of Health or the prevention measures. Again, you have to discuss that with your employer, and open communication is a key point here.
Great. I mean, we've got lots of questions coming in. So what about visa validity for those who get terminated?
So if you are an employee that is terminated, it's worth having this discussion with your employer. Your employer has the right to maintain your visa. So basically, you stop your employment contract or work permit. However, you still maintain your residency visa. Until now, it's extended all the way until the end of the year. you don't have to cancel your visa, you don't have to leave the country. However, you need to be aware that you're not entitled to salaries, you're not entitled to gratuity, you're not entitled to any allowances. The only thing that you're entitled to is the basic medical insurance, which means if you had, and I'm sure Milena, you can highlight that better than me. If you had, for example, a fancy, high standard insurance, all the good ones that we all like, your employer can actually downgrade that to the minimum insurance. So the basic insurance, basically, which I think is fair enough. You get something.
In terms of the insurance, is the employer allowed to let the employee, let's say they've been terminated, but they're going to allow them to stay on their visa, and let's say they have the comprehensive insurance, can they ask the member to pay on their behalf in order to stay on the better insurance versus downgrading to an EBP plan?
Okay, so the law didn't actually get into that detail because remember, it's at the discretion of the employer himself. So again, that will be a negotiation to try to get to a win-win situation. If as an employer you're not obliged or you don't have to keep the employee on your visa, so I think there is a room for discussion here. If they want to stay on the visa, then they want to stay on the enhanced plan or the current medical insurance plan, I think you can negotiate with them that they would pay some of this.
Okay, very good. Do these rules apply to DED companies also, or is it the DIFC only?
To which company, sorry?
DED?
Okay, so no, that applies only to the companies incorporated in DIFC. That includes holding companies, that includes SPVs, and includes all the financial and non-financial companies. So any company that is incorporated in DIFC only. Remember, that's a DIFC presidential decree. That is a bit different than the one issued a couple of weeks ago by the Ministry of Human Resources, which applies to other mainland and some other free zone areas. So that is these rules, that directive is very specific to the DIFC. Very
good. And in your expert opinion, do you think the other free zone companies will follow what the DIFC is doing?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So DIFC always has its unique area. To reflect on that, when the Ministry of Human Resources issued some amendment to or a certain amendment to the employment law that allows employees to reduce salaries or impose certain leaves, pretty much the same emergency measures, they required the previous consent from the employee. So the employee had to sign a document that say, I agree to cut my salary until a certain date. DIFC understands that some of employees, due to the nature of the business in DIFC, some places they actually work overseas by default, or they fly a lot. So some of them already don't have access to the office facilities, or they can't sign these documents. DIFC made it clear that you don't have to take the prior consent. So that's the difference. I think other places like ADGM or Dubai Internet City, which usually work closely with DIFC, will impose a certain allowance for employers to do some of these activities without having to have a written consent from their employees. So yes, usually DIFC is quite a couple of steps ahead, and usually other free zones follow.
Okay. What happens to the accumulated leave balance during resignation if someone was subject to salary reduction? Would it be calculated on the original salary or on the reduced salary?
Okay, so if for the vacation times, if you still have any, and if your employer didn't actually like force you to take them, that would be calculated on your original basic salary.
Okay, very good. Are employers allowed to use office CCTV to ensure employees are following the company safety protocol, i.e. 2 meter distancing, wearing masks, etc.?
Absolutely. So as it's your obligation as an employer to stick to the rules, and in that regard, DIFC gives you all the facilities and tools that you need to make sure that you're complying with these regulations. So in the office itself, you can keep CCTV cameras, and on the work or the company devices, it could be a laptop or a phone, dongles or USB connections, etc., you are allowed to have certain activity tracking devices or tools. Some companies are using now attendance software, which is, I assume that's part of what you're asking about as well. You are allowed to use this, but you have to notify your employees of what information are you collecting. Is it login details? Is it keystrokes? Because that's very important. If they have their own personal logins or passwords, they are using it through their company device. So you have to let them know what information is being collected and what is the use of that information.
Great. Is it simply mean by 30% limit, if the total employees are 100, then 30 of those can come back to the office?
Absolutely. And as an employer, you have the right and the power to specify which specific rules have to attend to the office. So let's take, if you're running a bank, for example, you would say the tellers and the risk officers, for example, or cash handlers. These are the main essential rules that they have to attend, and the employee has to comply with these rules. You also can set who cannot attend to the office. So if someone just likes to come to the office because kids are noisy at home or they don't like working from home anymore, you can actually set certain restrictions on who can attend and who cannot attend to the office facility, and the employee has to comply with that. Otherwise, they face immediate termination for a cause, and you have the right to terminate them with forfeiting all their benefits.
Fine. There's a question here that I can answer. Would the insurance companies accept to cancel a policy while the visa is still valid? The answer is no. The reason for this is that as per the DHA, as a sponsor, you actually have to insure whoever is on your residency. So in this case, if you wanted to downgrade the members' benefits, you can actually opt to buy them an EVP plan to basically be able to give them a lower insurance, but you can't cancel their visa. You can't cancel their insurance while the visa is still valid. Amr, are you still there?
Oh, yes. Sorry, for some reason.
No problem. Okay. Employees under probation period before 6 months and will be eligible for benefits of the COVID-19 law.
In DIFC,
yes.
the probation period is quite different than in mainland. The probation period is the right for the employer to terminate you without having to go through a lot of legalities. It's basically without notice. However, when it comes to gratuities, when it comes to employee benefits, there is no such thing in DIFC as probation period. You accrue your gratuities, you accrue your benefits from day one. So it starts from the date of your contract, and it continues all the way until the termination or the resignation.
Okay. All of these rules described in the presentation, are they applicable to JAFSA companies too?
Technically speaking, no. But JAFSA would be able to take that as how to say this. So they can actually refer back to it in certain cases, because again, it's a presidential directive, so it's issued by part of the presidential management of DIFC. As we speak, it's only in DIFC, but other free zone areas can actually refer to it.
Great. Can you please explain the gratuity area again? If an employee has to be let go after 2.5 years on 30th of April, when their pay for April was at 50%, so they started in March 2018 and terminated in April 2020. So what will be the gratuity that will be calculated? Will it be based on the salary that they have in April 2020?
Okay, that depends if the question coming from someone that is employed in DIFC or out of DIFC. So I'll answer both. If you are in DIFC, if you are in DIFC, all your gratuity is calculated until 1st of March is calculated based on your original salary without reduction. Between 1st of March and 22nd of April, let's just call it April salary. That will be calculated also based on your original salary. So the only time you will get gratuity calculated based on the reduced salary is starting from May. And that will be your monthly contribution. Remember that all the companies in DIFC now are mandated to pay monthly in the dues scheme. So there is no such thing as accrual. Starting from 1st of March, every company is paying monthly. If you are in mainland, the Ministry of Human Resources was very specific that gratuity is calculated if an employee is terminated. Gratuity is calculated based on the original salary, not on the reduced salary.
Okay. Do you think the same new directive will be implemented anytime to the mainland companies?
There are certain rules that it's actually the same now in the mainland. However, when it comes to that specific directive or the emergency COVID-19 measures, the companies in the mainland require certain, they have to get the signature of their employees for any salary reduction or imposing any leaves or reduction of working hours. And it has to be done through the Ministry of Human Resources, or what we call it Ministry of Labor, specific documents, and it goes through their channels. What DIFC have done is they removed that barrier and they allowed employers to do that without prior consent from their employees. So the rule actually exists in the Ministry of Labor. If you're talking about the monthly contribution thing, it is actually, yes, it is being discussed as we speak. Obviously, the Ministry of Human Resources is a bit slower than DIFC. It's a huge amount of companies, but yes, it is being discussed as we speak.
Okay. What if an employer reduced March month salary, even if the employers were working from office premises?
Oh, in DIFC, according to that decree, that is not accepted, and you cannot decrease the salaries retrospectively. So the decree is effective from 22nd of April. If that happened based on like communication or negotiation between an employer and employee, then it's fair enough. You can't go back to your employer and say, you know what, the decree says this, you need to give me back my salary, because technically they weren't in breach of the law. And this is something that we need to be aware of. It's not set in stone. Some of us are struggling to maintain the businesses. Some of us businesses are thriving. So you need to be wary of this kind of stuff. You need to pick your fights carefully, because in these tough times, we all try to stay afloat, basically.
Of course. Does termination and resignation have the same benefits, or are there any hidden benefits?
In DIFC, it's quite the same. If you are terminated or if you resign, both accrue the same benefits. And I assume in the mainland, it's quite the same, unless you're on a very specific contract, which is the limited contract, where your employer have to give you certain notice. However, in DIFC, they are all equal. So if you're terminated or if you resign, you get the same benefits.
Okay. There's a question here, basically, can we put together some form of transcript? So yes, we're working on that at the moment, and it will be on the BASAT COVID-19 playbook on our website. So it will be there in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share the presentation if you may.
Please. Can the 30% attendance be rotated between employees?
Absolutely. As an employer, you can actually create certain rotations to make sure that you maintain the business. Obviously, if you reduce the working hours for some employees, there will need to be rotations for these employees. Absolutely.
Great. If your visa expires now, will the employment visa be valid until December? And what happens with health insurance as they're connected with the visa validity? So on the health insurance side, it is actually possible to renew your health insurance without having your visa renewed, just because there is a delay. So I know that from our insurer partners, but I'm not 100% sure in regards to the process on the visa renewal. Amr, are you able to give more insight?
So when it comes to the visa, it is very clear. The visa can still be extended. So you don't have to worry about them. There is a big difference in DIFC between work permit and residency visa. Work permit is the one that stops when you're terminated. So basically, you lose your access cards, you lose your salaries, you lose this kind of stuff. However, your residency visa is extended until the end of the year, and this is not only for DIFC; it's for all the country. That is a federal rule that visas will be extended whether you're in the country or outside of the country, and if your visa expires, it will be extended in validity until end of the year.
Okay. If a company asks any employee to stay at home, will that employee be paid or not? For this situation, i.e. unpaid leave days, company needs to register a contract with authority like a pay cut. So I guess the question here is if people are asked to take unpaid leave, does it need to be amended in the contract itself?
It wouldn't be amended in the contract because it doesn't come as an employment term. It comes as an emergency measure, and that can be communicated through an email, but it has to be communicated clearly. So whether you're the employee or the employer, it has to be clearly stated that you are on unpaid leave, so you're not entitled to a salary during this payroll period, whether it's a month or 2 or 3. And remember, that comes with a certain validity until 31st of July. So it's not an open term, it's limited with that time. So your employer, just because they said you can stay at home, it doesn't mean that you're on unpaid leave. It has to be communicated clearly that you are on unpaid leave.
Okay. Somebody here has one of their team members who went for a delivery in the Philippines. She was supposed to be back on 4th of May from her maternity leave. However, the first available flight is on the 15th of May. So now they want to know what will happen to these 11 days in terms of her salary. Should they pay her or, should they not pay her or include this in her annual leave for next year?
Okay, so she's on, I assume she's on a leave that's not a sick leave. Is that a maternity leave?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
if it's a maternity leave, that is covered already within her maternity period. So that counts towards her annual leave. And if she extended that, this means that this could be reduced from her salary because it's an annual leave.
Okay.
The only part that is specific was the sick leaves due to, not any sick leave, it's a sick leave due to COVID-19 affection. So if you're affected or if you're quarantined, these are the parts that don't count towards your 60 days annual leave.
Very good. Will an entity out of the DIFC be able to replace their current scheme with the new scheme as an alternative?
So inside DIFC or outside DIFC?
So will they be able to replace their current scheme with the new scheme as an alternative?
In DIFC, you don't have...
Out of the DIFC.
Out of DIFC, yes. So this is actually what we do at Finflex. So we help companies restructure their gratuity schemes to manage their balance sheets more efficiently, and we help automate that on a monthly basis. So yes, you can, and this is something that you agree. As the law states now in the mainland, there is nothing stopping you as an employer to pay your employees monthly or accrue that amount on monthly basis, as long as you're paying the same percentage or the same amount as the 21 days or 30 days. So yes, you can do that. And we actually encourage companies to do this because that keeps their balance sheet healthy.
Okay. And also, if there's an entity in both DIFC and elsewhere in the UAE, how will this be managed, since there could be a misalignment in treatment of those employees?
Okay, that's also a very good question, and that actually came a lot in the past week. Technically speaking, you are responsible for your employees in DIFC. You're responsible to follow the DIFC regulations and outside of DIFC. But for the sake of you as an employer, that you are keen on keeping everybody on equal level, you don't want to create some division in the company. So you need to communicate that clearly with everyone. If someone is affected or you're doing something to someone without their prior consent because they are in DIFC, you need to let them know that this is as per the DIFC regulation, and you're not just creating separate rules for separate groups of your employees.
Okay. Do we need to share the amended contracts with the reduced pay with MOHRE in the mainland? I believe the answer is yes. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. And yeah, the only way you can actually do that is through the standardized form by the Ministry of Human Resources.
Okay. Is there any regulation for Department of Economic Development companies for reduced salaries for staff during emergency period?
That is applicable the same as the Ministry of Human Resources applies to free zones and applies to the Chamber of Commerce or DED, yes.
Okay. Out with the DIFC, if termination is as of May 2020, can an employee still maintain residency visa until end of the year?
Absolutely, yes.
Is 3 months compensation salary applied in COVID situation?
3 months compensation salary. I assume that that was based on the in the mainland. On the if the company terminated you, you get 3 months. That applies in the mainland, but that doesn't apply in DIFC. In DIFC, there is no difference between termination and resignation. The only thing is termination for a cause. If you did something illegal, you forfeit your rights, but it's completely different than in the mainland.
Okay, and if we terminate an employee or cancel his or her visa, will it still be valid until end of the year or not?
In DIFC, you can cancel a visa, so you can submit for the cancellation, and they will be subject to the general rule of the UAE in general, which is they don't have to pay fines, so they forego the fines until the airports are open, so until the employee can actually leave.
Okay. How about if a person's on maternity leave since 6th of April, can her salary be reduced?
As long as you're not on a sick leave that is related to the COVID-19, yes, you can receive a notice from your employer that if in 5 days we will reduce your salary. Yes, that's true.
If an employee is stuck at home in their home country due to unavailable flights to come back to the UAE, for that period, do they get paid salary or not?
Again, if they are outside of the country or inside the country, that doesn't make a difference because everybody now is working from outside of the office. The only difference will be what category you will be in with your employer. Are you on an unpaid leave, or are you on a forced annual leave, or are you on or they will have to unfortunately let you go. So both ways it will be communicated to you with at least 5 days notice. And just to clarify, 5 days as notice of the action, not the effect of the action itself. So if I want to cut someone's salary, I have to let them know 5 days in advance, and this is when the salaries, the effect happens. So the decision takes effect. I can't just terminate an employee based on a 5 days notice. It has to be the 1 month notice still.
Okay, so we're going back to the lady who delivered the baby in the Philippines. So
congratulations.
Congratulations, yes, first of all. So she's completed her maternity leave on the 4th of May. So after the 5th until the 15th, basically depending on when she can come back, do they have to pay her salary, or can they include it in the annual leave for this year?
Again, that's a very tricky part. So let's take the annual leave out of it for a little bit. You were supposed to come back from the maternity leave, but because of the situation, you can't come back to the office. Assuming that you can still work from home, because this is past the 45 days that is allowed to you, then your employer can actually ask you to work from home and apply to you either a no pay or a reduced pay. Just remember that a no pay doesn't mean that you have to work. A no pay means that you're on a leave, an actual leave. So you're not getting paid and you're not working. If you're on a reduced salary or reduced pay, then you actually have to work.
Okay, because there's actually the next question is my company told me to work from home, all employees from 23rd of March. Do they have the right to reduce my salary or not? I guess if you're still working from home, they have the right to reduce your salary as long as you're working.
Yes. The only rule that applies is if they stop paying, you stop working.
Okay.
Simple.
In mainland, can we rest some employees as work from home with a 50% of gross pay?
Yes, you can. That's part of the facility allowed to you by the Ministry of Human Resources. So you can reduce their salaries, but at the same time, you need to you have to reduce their work hours. So basically, it comes as a balance. Usually, you tell the employee that we're reducing your working hours by 50% and reducing your salary by 50%. You have the discretion to remove the allowances as well. So when you reduce the total salary, not the basic salary. When you reduce the salaries, it's on the total, not on the basic. That's something that people need to be aware of as well. So if, for example, my total salary is 10,000 dirhams, 5,000 is my basic, and allowances, when you reduce on the 10,000, not on the, you don't reduce from the basic salary only.
Okay, but so for example, on the salary reduction, if you take a 50% pay cut, but the companies are still expecting you to work full-time hours, is that allowed or not?
The issue here will be the monitoring. So again, if you're entitled to do certain jobs that require working from this time to this time, then yes, you have to. Whether your salary is reduced or not, because they highlighted in the decree that you can, as an employer, you can impose certain restrictions and also certain limitations on the working hours. So basically, we need you so much, so you need to, like, to work hard with us during these times. But we will have to reduce their salary just to keep the boat afloat. Yes.
Makes sense. Does the 5 days notice for salary reduction applies on people under Ministry of Labour visa?
No, that only applies in DIFC. In the Ministry of Labour or by the Ministry of Human Resources, it starts when you sign the document that is sent to you by your employer through your Ministry of Human Resources.
Okay, there's a question here just that's up your street. Another question about the new scheme and the DIFC in regards to gratuity. Will the monthly contributions be held in an offshore or onshore account? And is there any activity being done with the funds that contribute to the pot?
Okay, so as we speak, the DIFC scheme is managed by Zurich, and they hold it on onshore and offshore accounts. So there are two parts to the scheme. The scheme is invested according to your risk appetite, your choice as an employee. So you get to choose what investments your money goes into. If that investment is Sharia compliant, they use part of the funds from Emirates MBD and other local providers. So these funds will be onshore. For the global diversified portfolios or international portfolios, that would be mainly offshore. Yes.
Okay, very good. How is it possible to get a counter signature on revised contract if an employee is out of the country or on annual leave?
That is a very tricky part. In DIFC, DIFC acknowledges e-signatures as long as it's a verified signature. So whether through a simple PDF signature or even a validated one like DocuSign or Laser App or something like this. In the mainland, they actually, during this emergency period, they allowed e-signatures as well.
Okay, very good. So we've been using DocuSign, which is actually free, and it's really, really good.
DocuSign is good, yes.
Very good, cool. So we've covered 40 questions. Does anyone else want to ask anything before? Oh yes, tourism agency is going to last due to close a visa and other tourism if license is expired, if not renewed, fines are applicable.
If I understand the question correctly, is that related to you have a tourism business?
Yeah, I believe somebody has a tourism agency. So basically, yes, he's confirmed he's got a tourism agency. So basically there's no business at the moment. So if they don't renew their license, is there a fine?
I don't think I'm able to answer that question like in a complete confidence. You have to get back to your lawyer. But I can answer when it comes to your own visa or your employee's visa, which I assume they expire as the license expires. But generally, in all over UAE, it could be extended until the end of the year. But when it comes to the Chamber of Commerce or the renewal of your license, I think you need to check with them specifically if you will accrue any fines or not.
Okay. One more thing about the new scheme. Are there fund managers managing the portfolio, or is it open architecture based on risk appetite?
So it's a mix of both. So that's one of the things that also we cover in one of our presentations. You have active part in your portfolios. So there is Mercer that is managing your portfolios underneath, but it's based on a diversified risk appetite portfolios. So you get to choose either it's a moderate, aggressive, conservative, but within the portfolio itself, there is an active management element into it. Yes.
Okay.
That's why the fees are high.
Okay. If your employer sent you on no pay, does this mean you're not obliged to work during this period? I believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. They don't pay, you don't work.
I like that. You don't pay, you don't work. Very simple. Cool. I think that's it for the questions. Amr, thank you so much. The session was fantastic.
You are most welcome.
Please do share the presentation. I'll share it with all the attendees that joined us today. It was a true pleasure to learn more, and thank you so much for your expertise and your insights.
Thank you so much.
I learned a lot, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
You too. Take care. Bye.